What's up, guys? Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my approach to mixing and mastering. I think when you're a beginner producer, the idea of a master and a mixdown sounds really intimidating, and you might find yourself trying to listen to your song in your car or your iPhone and it just sounds awful, and you're like, what can I do? How can I get it to sound like all these other tracks sound? How can I make sure it sounds good across all different mediums? Well, I'm just going to share a few tips today on things that I wish I would have known when I first started producing. I think these tips are really just going to save you time in the long run, and they're going to really speed up the process of your progress as a producer. So the number one thing that I'm going to try and tell you first, I think it is probably the most important thing, is do not produce at a really high volume. If your sound is blasting in your ears and you're listening to a loop over and over again, it's really going to tear your ears down faster, and you're going to have a really tough time distinguishing the different frequencies, and it's really just going to more or less make it more difficult for you to produce a track clearly. I would advise that you really listen on a low to middle of the road volume. I think even listening at a really low volume can be good sometimes, and it can really provide clarity to the mix. I think it was Dom Dalla who had mentioned that on a lot of his mix downs, he learned that turning the volume down really low helped him out. And so yeah, I think that's a good way to try and hear your mix better, is turn the volume down really low. But overall, just do not mix at really high volume. It's okay to every now and then maybe listen at a loud volume just to see how it sounds, but don't mix and master and produce your track at a high volume. So the next thing I want to talk about is reference tracks. Reference tracks are going to be one of your best guides into getting your mix to sound as good as it can be. What I like to do is find a couple tracks that I'm inspired by, ones that I really like on very popular labels or maybe labels that I like. I like to pull them into my DAW, and then when I start my track, I like to try and get my levels of my drums to the same levels of the drums that I'm referencing. So in this case, let's take a look at this track. I'm bringing it down to about -8 dB. And then, so when I create my drums, I'm wanting them to peak at about -8 dB. There might be some variance there. I think in this case, they might peak a little bit higher. Maybe they're at -4 or something, but you're really just trying to listen to the volume and match the level of your reference. Let's give it a listen here. So yeah, you can see that they sound pretty similar. Maybe mine is a tad louder, but overall they're pretty close. And so when I'm making my drums in my track, that's what I'm doing, is I'm referencing my reference track at -8, and I'm trying to match it with my drums. And what that will do is that will help me later on when I am working in with my mastering process. I'm leaving what is called headroom for the track. So then the mastering engineer, or in the case if it's me as the mastering engineer, I can then push those levels back up to about 0. When you're mixing and mastering, it's important to do a thing called leaving headroom for the track. What that really means is that it means that you're leaving room between where your track is peaking and 0 dB. So if we look at my master here, we can look at where it's peaking. About -3.5. If you talk with mastering engineers or you look on their websites, they'll probably say something like leave -4 dB headroom or -2 dB of headroom. This is what they're talking about. If we listen to a more heavier part of the track, maybe here, it might even peak maybe at 2 or 1. Let's see what I have here. So it's staying around that -3 area, and I think that is about a good range to keep it in. What this really does for you down the road is it allows the mastering engineer, or you, if you are the mastering engineer of your own track, to then raise everything else up to the standard level. I'm not going to get into much more specifics of it, but leaving headroom is really important, and I think it makes it much easier for the master to work its magic and sound good. All right, so the next thing I want to go over when it comes to mixing and mastering is your low end. If you're running into issues when you export the master file, or maybe when you give it to your mastering engineer and they say that you need to clean up the mix or do something, 9 out of 10 times it has to do with your low end. So we're going to take a closer look at the low end here, just because it's really, the number one thing that people run into issues with, and it always affects ultimately your mix and master and how loud you're able to get it and how clean you're able to get it. So I'm going to teach you 2 tools today that I use that I wish I would have known earlier, and they're really just both side chaining tools to effectively make your kick and bass sound clean in the mix. So I have 2 plugins that I use for this. One is Kickstart, and one is a little bit more complicated, and it's Pro Q3. Let's take a look at Kickstart first. If we take a look at this, what we see is that I have it sidechained here, and it is at 77%, and it is effectively sidechaining everything below 264 Hertz. Everything above that is going through. The kick drum is going to be hitting in about this area, and so I moved it to right behind the kick drum so that then the bass comes back in after. Basically all of this part here from the bass, this is what's being eliminated from the bass because the kick is right in that area, and then it comes in right after the kick hits. So let's listen to this. We'll listen to them together, just these. Yeah, so not sure if you could hear that, but in reality, the kick, once I took the sidechain off, it was a lot harder to hear the kick because the low end part of the bass was then pushing through and conflicting with the kick drum. This is just really the first go-to tool that I use to make sure that my bass is sidechaining to my kick. So we can take a look as well at Pro Q. I don't think Pro Q, this secondary tool, is always necessary, but if you're having trouble and you really want to take the extra step to make sure your kick and bass sound clean together, you can use a tool like Pro Q to really target a specific frequency region. In this case, what I'm doing is I have directly sidechained it to my kick drum right here, and I have created this little triggered EQ, and it is basically ducking this little curve is ducking every time the kick hits. So we can watch it as it works its magic. Yeah, so it's really just targeting that conflicting area where there is too much low end. When you see that red come up, basically just means that there's too much low end there, and so that's why I'm using this to duck the bass where the kick is hitting. Now we can also use this as a reverse way. If we want the kick to punch through more, we can actually copy this here and then paste it to the kick. I'll do this sometimes, and it's really just a quick and easy way to make sure that your kick is just punching through that low end. So if we paste it here, we can reverse it and then boost it there. And let's listen to how this sounds. If I didn't have it on, let's do this. So I don't think it's really necessary to use in this case, but you can definitely hear it. How if I turn that up, the kick is all of a sudden just overpowering, and it's taking, the place of really where the bass was. Now, obviously you would want to limit that. You wouldn't probably want to use more than a +1 or 2 dB boost on the kick drum in that area, but you can really tell how it's a quick and easy way to just push your kick through over the bass. The last thing I want to talk about is really the stereo master versus a stem master. So producers they will do varying levels of their mix and mix down and master of their tracks. So what a stereo master is that's basically me exporting this as one MP3 or WAV file, sending it to a mastering engineer, and then have him work specifically on that file. I'm not giving him access to the individual instruments in my song, like a kick drum, a bass. If you were going to do that, that is called a stem master. And so you could send him, you could send them as much as maybe 8 different tracks. Maybe it's your kick, your bass, or maybe kick, your drums, your synths, your vocals. Or you could send them maybe up to like 16 or something. It's going to usually cost you more if you break it down into a lot of individual stems, because it's really just more work for them. For me, I like to do a stereo master because I really like the idea that the levels that I have are pretty solid, and I don't think there's any major changes that need to be made to those levels. But if you are starting out, a lot of times a stem master can be helpful in taking your track to that really professional level.